Welcome to the Bad Bosses, Great Leaders podcast, exploring what it takes to lead with purpose. Today, I'm joined by Jeff Sigel. Jeff is an author, coach, and consultant who is passionate about creating better work environments and more fulfilling careers for middle managers everywhere. After over 20 years of corporate experience at Nabisco, the Hershey Company, grocery retailer Ahold, and the restaurant company Cracker Barrel, Jeff has shifted his focus to coaching mid-level leaders and supporting companies looking to empower their middle management teams. He is currently a consultant and coach focused on turning strategy into action by developing middle management excellence. His book, The Middle Managers, a Toolkit for Middle Managers, is available on Amazon.com. Jeff, welcome. I am so excited to chat with you today about all things middle management and building that toolkit, how we can empower our middle managers and teams to be better leaders.
Sure. So I actually do this funny thing when I'm doing, live presentations where I put my bio sheet up and it's a picture of Oreos, a picture of Twizzlers, a picture of Stop and Shop, which is a supermarket up in the Northeast for those who wouldn't know that, and Cracker Barrel, the restaurant. So my career has basically been mostly in food marketing, and I started out at Nabisco working on Oreo cookies and Ritz crackers, and then I worked at the Hershey Company, where I always tell people my kid's favorite title I ever had was when I was the director of Twizzlers and Jolly Ranchers. Yes, that was on my business card. And then I ended up working at a grocery store company, and then I worked for Cracker Barrel, the restaurant company. And all that time, I was a middle manager, so that was sort of the common thread. I always had people that were reporting to me and people that I was reporting to, and have become, sort of over the course of my career, sort of really fascinated with this really interesting thing, which is we don't train people to do the roles of the middle manager. We tend to train them to do their, quote, job, but we don't necessarily train them to lead, to influence, to manage up, and so forth. And so last year I decided, I think I want to write a book about this. And that's how I ended up writing middle management.
I love that. And you're absolutely right. We don't have enough of that training. I'm curious, would you say that you're passionate about that subject, or you have a particular moment where you had that aha, it is time to write this book, or I've seen it play out a certain way, and I have to get this training out there?
So I think I would say I've had lots of ahas in my career. I like to tell people that my whole book is stories of like me falling down and getting back up, brushing myself off and learning from it. But the story that I start the book with is probably the biggest aha, which was the first time I was managing someone else. And I had the perspective of, oh, I'm going to coach this person. This is going to be awesome. And he had a totally different view of the situation. He's like, you just got the job that I wanted. And so this did not go terribly well. That, I tell a story about at the very beginning of my book about how he comes into my office, his budget is not ticking and tying the way I wanted it to. And I kind of got annoyed, and he said, is this really the best thing we could be doing right now? And I said, I'm not proud of this. I said, no. And if you got it right, we wouldn't have to do this at all. He left my office kind of from shaking his head. And I think that moment has stuck with me, where I'm like, wow, I have missed something here like this. And I think for me, the big takeaway was when you are leading people, it's all about them, not about you. It's about how do I tie what I need them to do to what they are trying to accomplish, as opposed to telling them do this because I told you so, which, I guess you can do to some extent, but it really ultimately leads to very burned out, unhappy people who often end up leaving, and all those kinds of things that we all know companies have to deal with.
The pitfalls of that. Well, you saying that makes me think about the levels of leadership and understanding that we're put in that position of authority where people are told they have to follow us, but they might not want to. You don't have the influence or the political equity with your team to be able to have that influential impact. I would love to hear, tell us more. How do you handle a situation like that where you are put in that position and there are other members on your team who were after that same role? How do you make an environment where they feel supported and still valued?
Yeah, I mean, I always go back to, I guess, two things. One is recognizing that everyone else is the hero of their story. And in the end of the day, if everyone else is the hero of their own story, you can really serve only two roles. You can either be a supporting character or you can be a villain. And so the key thing is, how do you basically look at the situation and say, listen, I recognize this person is disappointed, they're frustrated, they may be annoyed with me, whatever. How do you basically say, listen, I'm here to help you achieve what you want to achieve? And I think the other thing is sort of related to that is, how do you get everybody into this, what I call the learner mindset? I don't know about you, I certainly have suffered from this throughout my career, is this kind of what I call the achiever mindset. This is the mindset that says, I am the sum of my accomplishments. So I am my degree, I am my promotions, I am my titles and whatever. And I always say that's like focusing on the punctuation. It's really all that stuff that happened in between that got you there. You had to learn and grow and gain new skills and so forth. Is how do you kind of refocus people on like, what are the skills that you're going to learn? You know, you may feel like you were ready for this job. Maybe you are ready for this job. But I'm in this job. And so the question isn't how do we get along as much as how do we make sure that you are learning and growing and also make sure that you are ready so that the next time a role comes up, you're the person that's going to be considered for it. But again, it's all about how do I step into their shoes and how do I basically say, this is about you. This is about creating a situation where you can thrive and so forth.
So true, because we are probably more self-aware of our own position and not recognizing others and how important it is for a leader to be thinking of the people on your team. So I love how you highlight that. Tell me a little bit more about how you hold a conversation with someone who's either in line for promotion or maybe they have been promoted and they need to be better equipped to manage people. How do you approach that development conversation?
Yeah, well, the first thing is, so I think the biggest transformation that people need to go through as they move up their career is to recognize that we usually promote people because they're great at doing something, right? I'm a great accountant. Now I'm going to lead people that are accountants, or I'm a great marketer. I'm going to lead people who are marketers, or a great engineer, or a great plant employee, or whatever it is. And all of a sudden we're going to put you in a role where you are now leading other people doing that. And the assumption I think we sort of make, I don't know why we keep making this assumption, but the assumption should sort of make is, yeah, just doing stuff and leading people doing the same stuff it's the same skill. Clearly not. And so to me, the big transformation I always focus on with folks is, how do you get people to shift their view of what their role is from being a doer to recognizing that they now have multiple roles. So they are now a doer, a leader, and an influencer. And so if you can help them understand that they have these multiple roles, then what you can do is actually focus, now that you understand this, I can now focus on how do I give you skills to be a great doer. And I always say the doer role is all about managing your boss. How do you make sure you're delivering the things that they need you to deliver? The leader role is all about managing your team. How do you get the folks that are working for you to sort of do the things that you need them to do while feeling like they are engaged and moving forward in their own careers? And then the influencer piece is all about all those other people, the people that you don't report to, who don't report to you. And how do you sort of step into that role and understand that, all these people around you, they have all these other priorities and you need them to do stuff for you. And it's not that they are being mean or whatever. It's just they're just like you, right? You have probably at least twice as much stuff as you can do in a day, and so you're going to make choices about what you're going to do. So how do I get those people to, sort of commit to me and say, yes, I'm going to do these things for you, and create those relationships. And I think it's really about, once you understand that I now have these multiple roles, it becomes much easier to say, okay, now I need to develop skills for those roles. And so if you're leading somebody who has just been promoted into a new role, it's a good place to step back and be like, what is it that this person doesn't know that they don't know? And help them to understand, like, hey, you may not, you may not. There may be things that you're trying to do here, but without some guidance, you're not going to be able to do them very well. I don't know. I don't know if have you ever come across the situational leadership model? Are you familiar with that? Yeah. So, I mean, the flip side of the situational leadership is what I call situational learnership. It's the stuff that's on the bottom of the diagram. It's like you have to understand what type of learner you are, right? Am I somebody who is, essentially, I think the terminology they use is unconsciously incompetent, meaning incompetent, meaning I don't know what I don't know, or am I somebody who knows exactly how to do something? In which case, I need to be led in a different way, right? So I think actually helping people who are leaders to understand the situational leadership model from the perspective of, hey, every person who I'm leading needs to be led in a different way depending on where they are, but also getting the learner to be like, every situation where I'm learning, I actually need different types of support and help. And the other thing I always point out to people is you can be the same human being and need different types of leadership for different tasks, right? You may be perfectly great at writing that report. You may have never led a person in your life, so you're in a different position on that map.
That's so insightful, Jeff. You remind me, I was having a conversation with another guest about not assuming the person receives your communication the way that you intended. And with that understanding, they might need instructions given to them differently in the same way that people might need to learn things differently. And applying a different style of leadership or coaching development for the person based on who they are and what their needs are. But you've taken it a step further, which I appreciate, and that's the task itself might require something different of us as leaders or of the team. And we need to be mindful of the nuance of that, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, if I have done, 50 weekly reports, because I was, as a junior associate, I was doing, the weekly report on, how my business was doing. And I've done that 52 times or something. I'm going to be pretty good at it, but I have never had to write a PowerPoint presentation or present it to, the director or the VP or whatever it is. I'm going to need a different level of support. And it's very easy, I think, for bosses to kind of miss that point, which is you can have somebody who's really, really good at their job. And all of a sudden you give them a new task and they fail at that task. And actually, I'm going to use a story. I hope for my brother doesn't mind this. My brother has a story about how at some point he gave a presentation early on in his career at a company and it didn't go well. And his boss's view was, you can never present again because you're not good at presenting. Well, that's ridiculous. It wasn't that he wasn't good at presenting. It was that was a new skill for him. And so eventually he's, fortunately ended up with a boss who said, I don't know if you know this, but when I give a presentation, I always practice. And he was like, oh, he didn't know what he didn't know. And so now he practices and he gives great presentations. And obviously this was a long time ago in his career, but the point being, he needed a different type of direction. If he didn't get that direction, then he falls flat on his face. And it is incumbent upon us as bosses, by the way, to recognize when that's happened and point some fingers. Another sort of framework that I really like is this. I can't even figure out where it came from. Is this framework of contribution versus blame? So it's the idea of you always point the fingers towards you as opposed to towards the other person and say, hey, my person just went up and gave a presentation and they didn't do a good job. What did I miss? What did I contribute to this situation? As opposed to, they're terrible, I'm going to blame them. It's so easy to blame them, but how do you actually look at them and go, wait a second, there was probably something I missed here and I didn't set them up for success. And how can I make sure that next time? But if we don't let people fail, sometimes they never grow and learn, right? So how do you, let them present? And then if they screw up the presentation, then, let's give them another opportunity, but let's actually give them some guidance.
Absolutely. It's a delicate balance, the tightrope between setting someone up for success and the opportunity for success, and then knowing when they need to stretch their wings, and maybe experience what it's like to go through the challenge and the lesson. Absolutely. I love that.
And I think, a key point in there that you're bringing up is you have to be intentional about creating those opportunities. Like maybe the first time you have somebody present, you don't do it to the client. Have them present to you, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But give them the opportunity to learn and practice and see what works and doesn't work. Because it doesn't work because that's how they'll learn and grow, right? And again, that whole we talked about that earlier on, but this idea of like I need to create a mindset in my team that this whole exercise in doing work is all about learning and growth, not about. I know results are important. I'm not saying results aren't important, but if we focus on the learning and growth, the results will come. If we focus on the results, the learning and growth will not necessarily come. Is I think the thing that I always keep an eye on.
It makes me think of what's the outcome that you want for the person, for the company. And you're absolutely right. You can be in a situation where you're coaching and training the person, but it's a safe situation where it's safe to fail and it's not going to jeopardize the client relationship or jeopardize any maybe relationship with anyone higher up in the company because you've created that environment. I love that you made that point, and it makes me think too, maybe people don't always have the framework for training someone well. So how do you help someone train into that? Or what's a framework that you might use to help someone train?
How do they train their own people? Is that what you're thinking of? Yeah. I don't, one framework that it's actually, I mentioned this idea of doer, leader, and influencer. And this is, sort of the structure. My book's built around this structure. It's sort of a framework that I really like. And one of the things that I have been thinking about recently is what I call the 3 questions. And the 3 questions are these. The first one is, and these are questions that you should ask your people all the time, especially, one-on-one meetings, whatever. Ask these questions all the time, not just special occasions, like all the time. Question number 1 is, what did you learn? So whether you failed or whether you got it right, the question is, what do you learn? Because if you ask that question every week of your employee, they will show up every week with something they learned because they want to, do a good job for their boss, right? The second question is, if they are leaders of people, is how did you grow your team? So if you are a leader of people who leads people, training them by saying, listen, I'm actually going to ask you every week, are you doing, I'm asking you how you learned, but I'm also asking you to make sure that you've thought about how your team is growing and improving, and to create, again, this culture of part of my job is making sure my team is growing and improving. And the third question is, who did you help? And this goes, so if the first one aligns with the doer and the second one aligns with the leader, this one aligns with the influencer. This is, how do I create a mindset and an organization that is all about collaboration and helping people, and we're all working towards this common goal. So who did you help? And I actually think that I haven't been able to install this into a company yet, but I think you could very much change the culture if you could get a whole culture, if you could get the most senior leader, the CEO, the president, whoever is in charge, to actually ask those 3 questions of their executive team all the time. And that their executive team ask those questions of their team. Because what you will end up with is a culture that naturally is looking for learning, growth, and collaboration, which is, I think, how you can sort of elevate the whole team. So your question was really about how do you train folks? But I think one of the ways that I think is really powerful is the questions you ask people in their one-on-ones, in the meetings you have with them, in the meetings you have as a group, is actually get them in this mindset. This is what's important to me. This is what I ask about every week, every day. I'm always asking you, what did you learn? And actually, the other piece I'll throw in there is that's really important is to be as specific with positive feedback as you are with negative feedback. So we have this, I don't know, have you ever received the feedback, you're doing great, but, and then, I don't know about you, but it's like the whole first half of that sentence, the giant waste. Well, I'm not paying it. I think that often in managers' heads, they're thinking, when I give that feedback, I'm basically saying 99% positive, 1% negative, and the person is receiving it as probably the exact opposite, right? They're saying this was like some tiny little positive thing. In fact, it's almost more annoying. Actually, the one I hate even more is the sandwich. Have you come across this idea?
I admittedly have used the sandwich, and I've talked to other people about it. I'm curious what you're going to say, because I have some thoughts I want to share with you too on this. Tell me more.
Well, my point about the sandwich is I think that, I mean, if you were truly giving a piece of positive feedback and then a piece of critical feedback and then a piece of positive feedback, I think it would be okay. But I think people are onto us, right? When we do that, they know that this is really, I'll say it nicely because we're on a podcast, but it's a crap sandwich. Let's be honest, right? The crap in the middle is not made better by putting it on a brioche roll. Right? It's not. I know what you're doing. Yeah. And so essentially, and what's even worse about that is I know what you're doing and I know why you're doing it. You're doing it not because of me. You're doing it because you don't want to feel bad giving me this bad feedback. And I actually think the real way to deal with this is you give feedback all the time, not just at the end of the year, not just, if every day I give you at least one piece of positive feedback, if every once in a while I say, hey, could you do this a little bit differently next time or whatever, you're going to be like, okay, whatever, this is no big deal because I get positive reinforcement all the time. But if I do it as I only give you feedback when I have something negative to say, and I couch it either in a sandwich or in a, you're doing great, but I basically am going to really, first of all, I'm going to think you don't really care about my growth. What you care about is getting the results from me, right? In other words, you're doing through me instead of leading me. You're not coaching. You're just, I call it marionetting. And you're annoyed because the marionette, is not cooperating. Whereas if it's really about my growth, you would say, hey, I want to let you know that you did a really great job on this really specific thing. Like on that email, when you wrote this, that was great. Because by the way, that's how I always am a little hesitant to say this because I think some people are like, what? You're comparing people to animals or what? I don't know. Are you a dog person, by chance?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've got my neon sign. I have 2 dogs, 2 Shiba Inus. So yeah, I'm very much a dog person.
So you know that it's extremely hard to train a dog not to do something. Like if you want to train a dog not to jump on people when they come through the door, my dogs are terribly trained, by the way. But you want to train a dog not to jump on people when they come through the door, you train them to sit when people come through the door. You give them something positive to do, and then you reinforce it, with a reward. Human beings, for better or for worse, I think are pretty similar. If you tell people, hey, you did that one great thing, and you just keep telling them the little great things they do, they will keep doing them because people want to feel like they're doing a good job. So I'm interested to hear what your thoughts were, but that was my thought on the feedback.
Well, I'm so excited to hear you say all of this. I've had conversations about the sandwich, the feedback sandwich, and I have grappled with it too because you said it. People are on to us, and they are. And you know what's hard and challenging? When you've used the sandwich with someone who becomes a manager, and then they learn about the sandwich, and then they're like, wait a second. And then you can't use the sandwich. And that's been my sort of realization over the years. I've approached it. It was taught to me, and I can see the value in it. And I can understand why people maybe approach feedback that way, because to your point, it can be a little bit selfish of us as leaders. We aren't comfortable giving feedback, and we haven't learned how to give feedback. So we take this framework that seems to do the trick. When I have approached with that, I am very careful that the bread is genuine, that it is very authentic, and to your point, very specific. Otherwise, it will come across as manipulative. And we don't want to manipulate people. We want to connect with people. So if you are in that situation, if you feel like you have to give a sandwich and you haven't learned another way, then I always encourage people, well, at least approach it with the understanding that your feedback, positive, needs to be as genuine and intentional as the constructive feedback. I say all that to say too, you mentioned something else about, it brings to mind Kim Scott's radical candor. And it is not kind, use the word couch. It's not kind to be unclear in our feedback. And when we confuse people with positive, maybe negative or maybe constructive, however you're looking at it, and then positive again, we're jerking their chain like a dog. You're pulling them in other different directions and they don't know what you want from them. And to your point, I absolutely agree. You're absolutely right. We have to be comfortable giving consistent, quick, immediate feedback to people, as immediate as it can be, and still have the kindness. And that's where I think people confuse kindness as not being nice and flattering someone. It's saying, hey, this is what I'm observing, or I want to show you a different way, or hey, I noticed you did this. So I'm really excited to chat. I haven't had an opportunity to chat with anyone about that. And I love that you bring that up because I do agree. And I know that there are better ways. I think you know more than I do that there are way better ways to deliver feedback, healthy and positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I'll share two things that there are two feedback approaches that I talk about the most. One is something that I don't know if this is something that I picked up from someone else or whatever, but what I remember was, and when I first started leading, we talked about my story of my first direct report, but when I first started leading, they gave us one of those, here you're a new leader, workshops or whatever, and I know it was good. It's just the problem was it was just we never did anything with it again afterwards, whatever. But the thing that the guy said there was, I think he said 9-1. It might have been some other number, but he said you have to give 9 pieces of positive feedback for every 1 piece of critical feedback. And so I actually I sort of took that fact, which may or may not have been the right number. It doesn't matter. But and I said, I'm going to create, and it was after that I think it was the next report that I had after that first direct report. I created this form that I used where I would actually, when I had a new direct report, I would literally define in very large buckets what it was that I was looking for that person to do. Like, I want you to be strategic. I want you to execute with excellence. I want you to demonstrate personal leadership, whatever. All very high level things that basically mean nothing if you don't describe what you're actually supposed to do. So then underneath each of those, I had bullet points, if it's being strategic, considers options, comes with solutions, confidently defends ideas, whatever, just very clear. These are the behaviors that go with this high level thing that I'm asking you to do, being strategic, which, by the way, is, I think, a lot of people get that feedback at some point in their career, and they're like, I don't know what that means. I'm going to go write letter. So what I ended up with was usually a list of about 20 to 25 specific behaviors that laddered up to these big ideas. And I would go through each of them and say, when the new report started, and I would say, here's what I'm looking for you to be functioning at the next level. Not, here's what I'm looking for you to be able to do your job. Let's assume that you can do your job. Here's what I'm looking for you to be functioning at the next level. And I'm not saying that when you master all those, I can get you promoted, because that's not up to me. But when you've mastered these, this is when we'll start having that conversation. And I purposely designed the behaviors in that format so that I was giving roughly, 80 to 90% like stuff that I could give positive reinforcement on. And usually I would have a couple things in there that I was like really wanted the person to focus on. That I knew they would get, sort of feedback that, push them, because I wanted to make sure I was giving them. And then what I would do is every month, give them very specific examples of when they did something. Like, hey, that email you wrote to so-and-so the other day, I thought that was a great example of this, or what, very, very specific. And then I would tell them, this is where I think there's an opportunity for you to do more of this. And we would have a conversation about it. So that was one. The other one was this idea that was used at the grocery store company where I worked, called plus ones. And the idea of a plus one was like, let's say I was the let's say I'm the district manager and you're the produce manager of a store, and I come in and I'm looking at your produce department, and I would say to you, I'd like you to do a +1 of your department. And the idea of a +1 was you would tell me on a scale of 1 to 10, where would you rate the department? And then you would say, here's where I think it could be better. Here's where I think it's great. Here's where I think it could be better. That's why I gave it a 6. And then the +1 part was, in order to be a 7, this is what would have had to happen. And then once that was done, I would say, thank you. I would have rated it a 5 because X, Y, and Z, and this is what I saw that was positive, but this is what I think is, could have been better. And let's say I noticed, and you didn't mention anything, but there's a lot of bruises on the strawberries in that department or whatever. And I would say, I noticed there was some bruising on the strawberries, and freshness is a strategic focus for the company right now. And so I think it's really important that you focus on this. What I really like about that method is, first of all, it gets me as the leader to see how you think. So I am watching you talk about your department and seeing what you're seeing. And then it gives me an opportunity, after I've seen how you think, to sort of say, hey, this is how I think about it. So your mind is open because you are actually you're critically looking at your department, your produce department in this case. And then I'm coming in and saying, here's some other things that you should be thinking about. And I guarantee you, the next time you're doing the department, I'm off at some other store. The next time that you are working on the department, you will not forget to check the strawberries for bruising, because I have helped you think the way I think. And so this is a feedback mechanism that I love, because it's really all about, how do I change the way the manager think, or the direct report thinks, to get them to think more like me when I'm not there. And I actually have been saying a lot recently, I believe that is fundamentally the goal of leadership, is to create the conditions where you can trust your team to make decisions at a high level of performance when you're not around. That's what leadership is all about. And so to me, I love the +1 because it gets you out of, it sort of says, I'm trying to get myself out of this. I don't want to be involved. I want you to do this. I want you to know.
Jeff, I love that so much. I am going to steal that because I absolutely agree. You're so right. It's important that they are open to your perspective so they can make good decisions and have the reference point of aligning to company goals. Everybody should be aligned to that, but they understand where you're coming from, and they can then teach other people to see things from I think it's called a dragonfly eye. I refer to it as that dragonfly eye of multiple different perspectives, so that you can find better solutions, stay aligned, and now they are ready for that next level. That was just a mini masterclass on how to help people level up. So thank you for that. I love that.
Well, and the one thing I will add, because there is one really important caveat, is you never do a +1 on a human being. That is not cool. You only do it on their work. I'm not rating you, right? We are all perfect 10s, right? Whatever. How do I rate the work? And when you take it away from, this is about me, and am I doing a good job? Am I going to get promoted or whatever? And focus it on the task at hand and say, how did this task? Because sometimes, I'm going to go back to the produce department. Sometimes the produce department is a mess because 3 people called out in the morning, right? Now the question then was, so your +1 becomes, I need to have a better plan for how I'm going to handle the department when 3 people call out, because this happens, right? But this isn't about you. You didn't know they were going to call out, whatever. You learned something from this process, but you are not a bad person because your work was not, the bananas were not filled. That's not the way to think about it. So I think, to me, that's really an extremely important, point to keep in mind, is we are not rating people's quality as human beings. We are working together to help each other learn to produce better work.
Absolutely. That's so important. I appreciate you qualifying that too, because I could see how, especially a new manager can fall into the trap of, well, so and so isn't doing this right, or this person, they're weak in this area, or they don't understand. I can't get them to do X, Y, or Z. When you made this point earlier, it's probably the finger pointing back at us because we didn't clarify, we didn't coach, we didn't train, we didn't instruct. And now we are giving feedback to them. And how unfair is it, especially when you have external conditions beyond our control, to then say, you're a bad worker or you're a bad person, or I'm going to judge you based on these outside conditions and factors that you can't possibly do anything about other than here's how we can solutioneer in the future together on this.
Absolutely. And, you brought up Kim Scott. One of the stories that stuck with me the most from Radical Candor is when she talks, I don't remember what the name of the person was, but that she uses, but she talks about this guy who basically, she just didn't want to tell him he was doing a terrible job. And the whole team was at some point getting so frustrated because they're all covering for him. And so she takes him out to lunch and lets him know that she's going to let him go. And his response was, why didn't you tell me? Which was like, I mean, I don't know about you, like, I think I had this like almost gut punch, like shiver, like, oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, what happened in that situation and what she recognized happened in that situation is she had let a situation fester to the point that that person was no longer it was no longer possible to rehabilitate the situation. They were just a mess. Everybody had taken over their work, whatever. And everybody was mad and the whole situation had gone downhill. And if she had just stopped and said, hey, what's going on here? Why is this guy not able to do the things that he should be able to do? And I just use the word should, but I often tell people I think the word should is the worst word in the English language, because when you're a manager, you're a leader, you look at your people and you go, they should be able to do this. And I'm like, yeah, but they can't. So what are you going to do about it now? like that's what they should do. Actually, I was doing a training the other day in the opposite direction. I was training about managing up, and I gave that definition that I gave earlier about leadership being, the goal of leadership being to create conditions where you trust a team to make the decisions on their own. I said, this is a rhetorical question. The first part of it was, does your manager understand this? And the second part of it was, should they? And my answer on the next slide was, it doesn't matter if they should or they shouldn't. The question is, do they or don't they? Or do they act that way? And then again, even as the direct report, what are you going to do about it? Yeah, actually, to that point, one of the things that I think was the most interesting thing that came out of that whole conversation about managing up was when I was asked people at the end of a workshop, what's one thing you learned today? And I would say at least 50% of the people said asking for feedback. Because after I gave that example, I said, if you aren't getting the feedback that you need to do your job well, you can ask for it. So in that was sort of a big, I guess, aha for people. Not that it's not rocket science. They know they can ask for feedback, but just sort of saying, hey, actually, it's part of your job to ask people for feedback. And frankly, I think we should do that in both directions, whether we're the manager or the managee.
Absolutely agree on that. There are so many different ways to ask for feedback too. I want your thoughts on how we can ask for it. Before we move on to that, you mentioned the shoulds, and it makes me think, I know I've fallen into that trap, especially as a young manager, and realized pretty quickly, I think maybe through some self-awareness too, the reason that I was saying should was a protection for myself. Well, they should know this because I told them, or well, they should have been able to understand it because the training was right here. And so I'm curious if you feel like that's a protection mechanism that we apply as managers when we don't realize that it's our responsibility and we're accountable for what they should or shouldn't do because of what we instructed them to do.
Right. 100%. Right. I mean, it absolutely is a defense mechanism. We are basically saying it's someone else's fault. It goes back to that contribution versus blame. The toughest thing about contribution is I have to admit that I played a part in messing things up, right? So, but that's okay. I mean, okay, if I recognize my part in messing things up, then I can start to move in the direction of fixing it. If I point my fingers outwards and say, nope, it's their fault. I don't know how many times I've seen that. I'm sure you've seen this too, where there's a team that's struggling, and so you have the manager of the team, and then the manager's manager, and the manager's manager is talking to the manager and basically be like, what's going on? And they're both agreeing the team is terrible. We don't have the right people. It's painful to watch because nobody's getting the results that they need to. All these junior people are getting basically pummeled because they are missing some piece of information, some training. They don't know something that everybody's saying, oh, they should know this, and nothing's getting fixed. And often what happens is a bunch of people end up getting let go or fired, and then you end up with a new group of people, and it's the same problem over and over again because you never fixed it, right? It's really incumbent upon us as leaders to point at ourselves and look at the situations, take a step back and go, okay, the team isn't doing what I believe they should be doing. So what's the reason why? And what do I need to do to get them to do the thing that I need them to do? Again, that goes back to, this is what I mean by our job as leaders is to, create the conditions where we can trust our team to get done what they need to get done. If they aren't doing it, it means that we haven't created the right conditions. So is there a process problem? Is there a training problem? Is there a communication problem? They're not understanding. Is there a lack of understanding of purpose? I actually think that's often the problem. People don't know why they're doing what they're doing. A quick aside to a story that I tell in the book was, at one point I used to work at a soup kitchen basically, and I would run the dishwasher with this guy named Larry. And one day there were no dishes coming in, and there should have been like hundreds of dishes coming in. And Larry's like, oh, we caught up. And I'm like, I don't know, like something. And I walk outside and I literally watch a teenage volunteer carrying one of those folding catering tables across the dining room. And then I look over to where he's going, and his fellow volunteer has another table stacked with dishes to this enormous level. I mean, it was like they're going to fall, break, whatever. And literally this kid was being proactive. He's like, we ran out of places to put the dishes, so I went and got another table. It never dawned on him that the goal was to get the dishes into the dishwasher. Well, we could talk about like maybe there's something with teenagers like being a little clueless sometimes or whatever, but fundamentally, I basically, from then on, I would, when we started, I would go out and I would sort of chat in whoever was doing the dish scraping, and I would say, the goal here is to get the dishes scraped and into the dishwasher as quickly as possible. And it never happened again, right? Because all we needed to know was why. Somebody told them, scrape the dishes. Now, you can argue that it should be obvious, but it wasn't. And so the answer is not, we're never having volunteers again, they are terrible or whatever. It's no, we need to change our process. Our process needs to explain to them why. And I think it's really important that, that we help our teams understand why they're doing what they're doing, and not, and assume that kind of thing might be the problem if they're not doing the right thing.
Absolutely. I'm laughing too, because I know I've made those mistakes, and you cause more work for yourself and for them, and owning it and taking the responsibility for it, because you're absolutely right. That sounds like that's where assumption can come creeping into, and we think, well, it's common sense, or, oh, well, they should just know the shoulds. They should just know to do this. And we really have to be clear with our instructions and make sure that, I had another guest talk about repetition. I think you mentioned it earlier too, that sometimes you need to repeat yourself, or in the other note you mentioned, situational leadership and learning, and are people receiving the information and instruction the way that is clear for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Or are they ready to receive the information the way you are giving it to them? There may be somebody that you can delegate 90% of the tasks to. And if you give them a task that they've never done before and they have no way to orient themselves to that task, they will do it wrong. And you'll be like, well, I don't know what happened with Joe. Like, Joe usually is so great. You did a terrible job. Well, maybe Joe has never, I don't know, whatever. He's never had to, build a snow castle before.
Yeah.
He
but,
did wrong.
but that's what a great point too, because we need to prepare them. Sometimes it is about what is the preparation and what's the readiness factor.
Yeah.
And such another great insight too, Jeff. I want to make sure we do have time for the feedback, because I do see people, especially young managers, struggle with that. How do you help managers, leaders ask for feedback in a way that makes them feel comfortable? Because it can be scary asking for feedback from a report. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think for direct reports asking their manager for feedback, the first thing I like to focus on is this idea of, again, getting out of this achievement mindset part of the problem with this achievement mindset of I am a sum of my accomplishments is, if I fail, what am I? Right? If I am the sum of my accomplishments, the moment I fail, it all comes crashing down. It is extremely, anxiety producing way of, sort of going out about your life. And also a very unsatisfying way of going about your life, because, I don't know, there's this, example that Brene Brown uses in one of her books of an Olympian who is like crying in her kitchen after she's like a couple weeks after she won gold, and her mother stops in and says, "Why are you crying?" And she says, "I thought I would feel different." Because in the end of the day, when you are focused on your achievement, once you've achieved, what do you do now? You have to achieve. So how do you get out of that mindset of, I am not the sum of my achievements. I'm my ability to learn. I am a learner. And because I'm a learner, I welcome and ask for feedback, because that's how I get better. I want to know, what am I doing well? What am I failing at? What could I be doing better? And I think the other thing is, so I actually think when you ask somebody for feedback, it's different than when you get the feedback. Because when you ask somebody for feedback, you have time to prepare yourself to get that feedback, right? So, okay, I'm going to ask for this feedback. And the thing is that sometimes when you ask your manager for feedback, what they do is say, we're like, "You're doing great," or "You're doing great, but," we already talked about that, right? And I think one of the things that is important to train the junior folks to do is to, again, this goes back to this whole idea of managing up, is to basically push your boss to give you the specifics. Hey, you just said I'm doing great. Can you give me a couple of examples of what I'm doing great at? Or if things aren't going well, this is another one, this is like the absentee feedback, right? I call this green eggs and ham. This is I come into my boss and I say, "Here's the report," and the manager says, "No, it's not good." And so I go off. I spend another 10 hours, and I come back, and the manager says, "Yeah, still not good." And so I call it green eggs and ham, because it's like, do you like it on a train? No. No. I will never learn what I'm supposed to do without doing that. And so, without getting that the information of what specifically am I not doing right. And so I think it's, in that situation, I tell people, like, ask the question. Like, I don't know, early on in my career, I had this guy who used to like correct every, he would just red marks all over my PowerPoint slides or whatever. And I wish that somebody had told me, like, I should have gone to him and said something like, "I've noticed that when I write a report, you tend to do a lot of corrections. It's really important to me to become more independent and to be able to do this to myself on my own. What do I need to know so that next time I can do a better job, and the time after that, and so forth?" Like, ask the person in the vein of, "I'm trying to learn. Can you help me learn?" And then they will feel better about giving you feedback, because a lot of times they don't want to give feedback because they're like, I want to hurt your feelings. I don't stop worrying about my feelings. Like, I want you to, and I think at the end of the day, from the other side, the flip side of giving the feedback is fundamentally it boils down to this idea of, if you give feedback from the place of, I am trying to help you learn, you will be fine. If you give feedback from, I am trying to get the things done that I need to get done, you will probably not be fine. Right? I mean, and so, again, it's, everybody needs to be in this mindset of, that's why those 3 questions that I talk, like, what did you learn? Right? And how did you grow your team? Like, how do you get everybody in this mindset of, I'm trying to learn. I need to be able to tell my boss, you, who's giving, hasn't given me feedback, what I learned this week. So I'm asking you, what did I learn this week? Because I don't know. How did you? The flip side of that is how did you grow your team? Like, how do we get into this mode of, I am here to help my team grow. So I don't know if that, hopefully that answers your question, but
it does. And as you're saying that and reminding us of those questions too, which I'm also going to steal, I'll ask the what have you learned, but I love the other 2 because I see it as helping to influence the culture and a mindset shift. I think you made a similar point. The other aspect of it is that I feel like if we as leaders do more listening, active listening, then you will get more insight from your team. And it sounds like we're on the same mindset aligned there, because I'm hearing asking questions. I love to ask questions that gets us to the root cause of a challenge, or it helps the other person have the aha moment that you've had without force feeding them a lesson, and trying to, you just have to get this lesson. No, it's really allowing them to work through it.
Yes.
In that safe space as well. Would you agree, disagree?
No, absolutely. And sort of a couple things that you made me think of as you were talking about that. One is, I tell people I always ask people, what's the most important meeting you have in the week? And if it's leaders, I always tell them it's the one-on-ones you have with your people, right? With your team, because there are a million places in the week. And a lot of people don't do one-on-ones because they give up on them because it's it's just a delegation meeting or whatever. It's actually not. I always tell people there's a million places where you can delegate tasks during the week. I can send you an email. I can do a drive-by. I can send you a Slack message. I don't know, nowadays there's like so many ways. I can text you. I can call you, whatever. But fundamentally, there's only one time in the week that I can coach you. And that's in that one-on-one. And to your point about the safe space and listening and asking questions. And I will say, the other thing you made me think of is, one of my sort of, pitfalls as a leader is I have a tendency to solution. If you walk in my office and say, I'm having trouble with such and such, I will start telling you, well, did you try this? Did you try this? Did you try this? Which is super annoying. Or been a kid or has kids knows that that does not fly well. And yet we do it to our employees all the time. And so I actually sort of, I love this idea of, I used to tell my direct reports, I'm like, if you want to come into my office and you're just venting, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But can you please start with the phrase, can I rant for a minute? Because if you start with that phrase, I will know, well, number one, don't solution. This person's just venting. And number 2, you're basically signaling to me, it may not be a minute, but you're signaling to me this is time bound. I am not going to melt into a pool of, anxiety and quit. I need a minute to vent. And as soon as I'm done, we will get back to solutioning. And it's funny because when I've told people to do that, it always leads to very funny conversations because they pop into my office like, can I rant for a minute? We always kind of laugh because it takes some of the edge off of it. I'm like, absolutely, go ahead. And then they rant and then, well, okay, what have you done? How did you think about it? What have you tried? Whatever. Get into the questions. But I agree with you. Listening, asking questions, definitely an area that I need to continue to get better at. But I absolutely agree with you. Listening, asking questions is the best way to run those one-on-one meetings, and those one-on-one meetings are the most important meetings of your week.
They are. I love my one-on-ones because they aren't for us as leaders, they're for the other person. And I love that your default is the solution, because that's mine too. And I have to I consider myself a very good listener, but I do have to stop myself and pause and I haven't tried the venting question, but I'm going to try that too. Yeah, I think that helps differentiate. And it also sounds like it can break the ice as well, or just get a little bit more of that release out, and you can laugh about it if it's appropriate. But the other thing you mentioned about that, or that just kind of comes to mind, is that we want to provide the solution. So what I like to do is have the team come to me with the solution instead. Is that something that you train or coach on and managing up, is, bring the problem, but also...
Yeah, absolutely. I call it asking for help without being helpless, or coming with solutions. Both those things, coming with solutions and coming with options. I think those three things. One is, if you show up in your boss's office and say, "What should I do?" They're going to basically be like, "Wow, you just added more problems into my day, and I'm going to have to tell you what to do," whatever. But if you pop into your office and say, "Hey, here's 5 things I've tried. I've boiled it down to 2 options. I'm planning to do this one unless you think I should do this other one. Can can I check with you?" Is a totally different conversation. I am still getting input, but the other thing is, like, can you think through, like, what would you, before you go and ask your boss for help, have you asked all the people that your boss is going to tell you to ask for help? Well,
oh my God.
And then the other one is to come with options, right?
Yeah.
This is the other one that people, I don't know how to do this one problem. I don't agree with you is a different problem. And so to walk into your boss's office and say, "I didn't do that thing that you asked me to do, I did this other thing," is not generally a good idea.
Yeah.
What you can do is walk in and say, "Hey, I looked into doing the thing that you want me to do, and here's what that's going to look like. And here's another option that I was thinking about. What do you think?" And they might say, "No, please do it the way, do it the first way." Or they might say, "Oh no, that's a really good idea." But if you walk in and you say, "I didn't do what you asked me to do," all they will think about is, "Why is this person not listening to me?" That's it. And then what they'll do is they'll make you go do the thing they asked you to do in the first place, even if your idea was better. Because you basically just ignored what I asked you. I don't care whether it was a better idea or not. All I care about is, wow, you just completely just disregarded me, and I am triggered.
Bosses have feelings too.
All right, well,
Yeah.
I talk about this a lot of, don't. I wrote an article some weeks ago, and it was called "You Can't Negotiate with Demons." If you demonize your boss, then you can't, there's no common ground. If they're just an evil person, they're not actually an evil person. So humanize them. I'm not saying that they're not doing terrible things, or that they're not a bad boss. They might be a terrible micromanager, but stop and go, "This is a human being. Why are they acting like this?" I mean, I always ask people, why do people micromanage? And often people get it right, but it takes them a second. People micromanage because they are insecure about their relationship with their boss. And so if you sort of go, "Oh, that's why my boss does this," then you go, "Okay, how can I," again, back to that whole villains and supporting characters, how can I be the supporting character in my boss's story?
Jeff, this is such great advice. I hope everyone takes this and runs with it in the right direction, because towards their teams, towards their bosses, their leaders, because it's all very practical tips and strategies we can take away to be better leaders, to level ourselves up, to get the recognition too for our work, so that we can have that opportunity to manage well and to lead well. Thank you so much for sharing all of this great wisdom. I feel like we need a part 2, but
anytime.
But I know people can hear from you, obviously read your book. I know they can glean from your wisdom and learn more from you elsewhere. So how can people connect and find you online so they can work with you and learn more about your projects and all of your coaching experience?
Sure. So I will say a couple of things. One is, you mentioned the book. The book is called The Middle Matters, a toolkit for middle managers. It's available on Amazon, and I think you'll just find more of what we've been talking about. The second thing is my author site, jeffsigel.com. So that's JEFFSIGEL.com. And you can find there my, information about my book. I have a blog, where I talk about middle management stuff every week. And so that's a great place also to reach out to me. And of course, I love when people connect with me on LinkedIn. So I think you'll find me, Jeff Sigel, and then just look for the guy who's just talking about middle management.
Thank you so much again, Jeff, for all of your valuable insights and practical wisdom for all of us in management and looking to grow our leadership team. And listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Bad Bosses, Great Leaders. Catch you on the next one.